Hello and welcome to the Resonanz Podcast. My name is Frank Pesci. I'm a composer and have been for 20 years. And in that time, I've written opera, art song, choral music, chamber music, and concert music, some of which has been performed across the world. A lot of it is on the shelf or on my hard drive, and I stand by all of it. The Resonanz Podcast is an extension of Resonanz, which you can find at my website, frankpesci.com/resonanz with a Z, which is a collection of essays, podcasts, technical intrigue, project updates, audio, video, that kind of stuff, and the craft, collaboration, and connectivity, which serves as the basis of my creative endeavors. If you're listening to this podcast, you are most likely a supporter of mine through Patreon, and I thank you for being here. And I thank you for listening. So today we are talking about a recent blog post of mine entitled After the Mountaintop, Notes from the Rubble Pile, in which I detail the experience of going through a major commission and premiere and the precipitous drop that took place afterwards. I've already did one podcast on this, where I talk about some of these details. But one of the things that I talked about in particular in that blog post and that I want to talk about today is really goes back to the first hints of what I wanted to do after that premiere, which is I kept joking that I was going to write a book after the premiere called I Didn't Learn This in School. So I started taking notes about the whole process of talking to people about the potential of a commission, the contract negotiations, what I did not expect to experience as a result of the rehearsal process, how I dealt with collaboration, how I dealt with working with an established institution. All of these things, none of which ever came up in school, where we barely scratched the surface on how to manage yourself in a professional situation in reality, when you're dealing with real people in a real situation, especially when those people are getting paid, and the professionalism that is inherent in such a situation and needed in such a situation. So I kept joking, I'm going to write a book, and I started taking notes. And I've got a notebook where now I do the first drafts of my blog posts. But in that notebook, and that has a big thing on the side of it that says, I didn't learn this in school. And that is really where Resonanz in its current form started. I still haven't written the book, but, I'm doing it here, right? In bits and pieces. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back. So about the time I decided that my career had collapsed, that the professional realization of my artistic endeavors, shall we say, had collapsed. And I accepted that, and it was around October, November of 24, about a year after the premiere. So I decided that's it. I'm done. I'm out. I failed. I'm a failure. This has, my worst nightmares about what would happen professionally have come true. And that's it. And then like a week later, I got an email from my alma mater, the University of Southern Mississippi. That's Golden Eagle football, by the way. I get an email from the folks at USM, the Arts and Sciences College, saying that we would love to do an alumni profile on you. And I'm like, oh, shit. And they said, can we send you some questions? And I'm like, fine. And they sent me a slew of questions that obviously showed that they had done some serious research on who I am, what I had done, and a lot about the recent premiere. And so I sat with it over the next couple of months, trying to figure out how to write answers to these questions, because I was in the middle of grieving the loss of my career, and everybody around me was, frankly, getting tired of hearing about it. And at the end of the series of questions was, what advice would you give to students who are just graduating? And I'm like, well, here it is. This is the stuff that I didn't learn in school. And so I wrote this. 3 points. The first one is do yourself a favor and take some time to think about what you would want your life to look like, where you want to live, who you want to spend your time with, whether or not marriage and family is part of that equation. Bucket list items, places you'd like to travel, things you'd like to do, personal health and fitness goals, finance goals. These things about your life that will shape what your life looks like when you think about your life at the various stages of it. And then figure out how a career in music can fit into that, or if it can. Because I know I didn't. I thought I wanted the career in music. I wanted to be a composer. I wanted to be, in my understanding of being a composer, the lone wolf, in it for myself, taking the world by storm, being the guy who does the thing. Not exactly sure where this idea came about, by the way, but it doesn't matter now. I did not consider what I wanted my life to look like until much, much later, much farther after I had graduated. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, and I have to credit my friend Brian Hooten, who is a fellow graduate of USM Jazz Department. We played together during that time at school. We played a lot and toured and recorded with a band called Astrolab. And we've stayed friends. I'm a dad. He's a dad. We talk about dad stuff. And I will have him on the Resonanz Podcast in the future, so we can talk about, we always thought we were going to put a podcast out together and call it Bullshit and Onion Gravy, because that's how we define our conversations. So anyway, look out for the standalone episode in the Resonanz Podcast, which will be Bullshit and Onion Gravy with Brian Hooten. But Brian says to me, he says, everybody talks about how much you can possibly make in a professional career. What are the industry standards when you're lucky enough to get a job in an orchestra, or whether or not you're a soloist, or what kind of fees you can ask for, or blah, 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 blah. And there are some professional organizations that represent particular types of instrumentalists, and there's musicians unions, and there are these kinds of things, and they have their minimum standards of payment and whatsoever, right? There ain't one for composers, P.S. But nobody ever talks about, Brian says, nobody ever talks about how much you should be prepared to spend on a career in music. That means continuing education, conference fees, travel, going to concerts, making the scene, equipment and maintenance of that equipment, both instruments and software or hardware, if that's your bag. Not to mention the emotional and physical cost, what those things cost. And that could be a reality for you. We don't talk about this at all in school because nobody wants to, because it sucks. And don't forget taxes. Unless you're one of the lucky people who are able to bust their asses and either get a university job or a position in an orchestra, even though those are not safe anymore. You will be freelance. And even some of the major orchestras, actually, and performing organizations are changing their business models to identify their orchestra membership as freelance musicians, and opera chorus membership as freelance musicians. So, talking about money, talking about the reality of money, talking about what money you need and what money you may get, but then how much money you're most likely going to have to spend in order to maintain that career is a nasty topic. Nobody wants to talk about it, but it is so important. And the third thing that I suggested to new graduates was really something that should have been told to me when I was in school, not as I'm leaving, but while I'm there, is to make and maintain collaborative relationships with your fellow students, because these are the people who are going to be your first professional contacts once you graduate. Let's see. I was, how can I put this? A dick when I was in school, and I was already exhibiting the lone wolf tendencies that I was talking about earlier. So I left university with nobody to call if I wanted things to work on, or if I wanted to work on something with somebody. I had nobody to call except for my then girlfriend, soon to be fiance, later to be wife, who I asked to do a lot of music for me, for better or for worse. But that is another podcast. So I think I'm going to break this. I've been thinking about, obviously, this blog post, and this is the second podcast that spun off of that one, and I think I'm going to do one more. So the first one was post-show blues. This one is what I didn't learn in school, and then the next podcast we'll get into some of the things I talked about in that blog post, and talk about the kind of mentorship that I needed at that pivotal moment in my career. I'm talking about the entirety of the commission, that whole process from beginning to end. And then what happened, the aftermath, right? What mentorship I really needed. And when it did not come because I looked for it, the lessons that I learned in the process, and how I feel like I could be, at this point in my life, an excellent mentor to myself from 2 years ago. And then, of course, thinking about what are the kinds of things that I need to be mentored on now at this point in my career, and where's that going to come from? And if it's not going to come from anybody else, then how could I help myself? Or how could I seek a collaborative understanding to help myself at this point? Because there's still things I want to do. Okay, so that's it for this part, what I didn't learn in school. I want to thank you again for listening this far, if you have indeed listened this far. And stick around for more episodes of the Resonanz Podcast. And you can learn more about everything that I'm doing at my website, frankpasci.com, and at the website for Resonanz, which is frankpasci.com/resonanz, and that's with a Z at the end of it. So thank you one more time. Thank you especially if you're here because you are a supporter of mine on Patreon. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, and we'll see you next time.